بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. I wanted to make a presentation which follows the presentation I made last September in Mogadishu concerning the concept, definition and philosophy of war. My academic colleagues and my friends requested me to make another presentation, and I intended to include some more explanations on some issues concerning the presentation I made the last September in Mogadishu. So here I have my friends and my colleagues and all those who are interested in this subject. It's a one lesson which I divided into three parts. The first part is I call it Introduction of War. The second part I call it Definition, Concept and Philosophy of War. And the third part I call it Military Strategy and Tactics of War. So today I wanted to make the first part the introduction of war, and I divided it into 8 subtitles. The first title is How to Define War. The second is Brief Definition of War. That is Evolution of Theories of War. 4. The importance of the state of war. 5. The modalities of cessation of hostilities. 6. Causes of war. 7. Social theory of war. And 8. Conclusion of the introduction of war. An overview of war. I wanted to make it 5 points concerning the overview of war. This is very important before we go in detail what wars is. This concern is how to analyze a war, how to define a war. When different scholars wanted to define a war, they make different analysis because they stand and look and judge the war from different perspectives. So number one, the analysis of war might be divided into several categories: philosophical, political, economic, technological, legal, sociological, psychological approaches, and are frequently distinguished. These distinctions indicate the varying focuses of interest and different analytical categories employed by theorists, but most of the actual theories are mixed because war is an extremely complex social phenomenon that cannot be explained by single factor or through a single approach. 2. War is considered different from murder or genocide because of the organization in which the participants conducted the war. 3. Almost every culture in recorded history has had some concept of warfare and has risen or fallen due to war. 4. War in terms of conduct. Military writers usually confine the term of hostilities in which the contending groups are sufficiently equipped in power to render the outcome uncertain for time. In this issue, they did not consider war when the opposing forces are not unequal. They consider massacre. 5. Explaining war on your stand on conflict. Armed conflicts of powerful states with isolated and powerless people are usually called pacifications, military expeditions, or explorations. With small states, they are called interventions or reprisals. And with internal groups, rebellions and insurrections. That was the overview of the war, and that is how to define war, how different scholars define war. When there are different scholars are defining war, they are standing from different perspectives: philosophical perspective, political perspective, economic perspective, technological perspective, legal, social, psychological, biological perspective. So it depends. When one scholar is defining war, it depends which approach he's looking or she is looking from the war. 2. Second point is evolution of theory of war. The evolution of theories of war Some scholars of the subject consider that the early or classical theory before the French Revolution is outdated and is not sufficient to define war. Others believe no matter how technology develops, the philosophy, concept, and the definition of war has never changed. Frankly speaking, I belong to the later part. What changes with the technology is the tactics in the battlefield, and of course, according to generally accepted theory, tactics is the process or the way to achieve strategy at the war. But the basic principles of war is the same. One has to read carefully the works of Karl von Clausewitz and Saint-Exupéry and other scholars before reaching a conclusion. Therefore, what is changing with the technology is the scope and the magnitude of destruction of war. But the philosophy, the concept, the tactics, and the principles of war remain the same. This also must be considered. Some people believe that since the technology has changed, and is changing every day, they believe the principles and the philosophy of war will change. That's not. For example, Saint-Exupéry said 2,500 years ago, he said, every commander must be very careful and cautious to economize his forces. And whether the technology develops or not, the first responsibility of every commander is to take care of what is called, or to reduce the cost of his people, his forces, and his nation. So what changed is the technology, but not the principle, the concept, the definition, and the philosophy of war. So, I have stated how to define war, and also the evolution of theories of war. Now I want to take some definition of war. Definitions of war I will detail in the second presentation. This is the first one, which is coming. I wanted to detail in the second presentation. But here, for the sake of understanding of the subject, I take two most generally and most accepted definition of war. The definition of war, I can take 3 points. Number one, war is defined as an armed conflict between two or more groups over resources, land, cultural differences, and other matters of contention. Two, one can say also, war is the state of usually open and declared armed hostile conflict between states or nations. Also, it can be said war, in a popular sense, is a conflict among the political groups involving hostilities of considerable duration and magnitude. These three examples I get generally for the purpose of understanding the subject, but I will detail in the second part the definitions of war from different perspectives, from sociological perspective, from psychological perspective, for economic perspective, for judicial perspective, for political perspective, psychological perspective. Every perspective has its own definition. 4. The importance of the state of war. Some people believe the state of the war is not important. That's very tragic. War, unfortunately, is a reality in our life, and it's a painful destruction. Some people are studying the war to perfect their art of killing, to perfect their war machinery, to be capable to destroy and kill maximum damage or maximum genocide in a very shortest time and in the least expensive way. Other people study war to understand deeply what war is, to find a solution, to substitute war, to find a solution that can use the states and the people to settle the differences and the contentions between them. So I wanted to take 2-3 examples that is supporting this. Whatever your intention is, state in the war has become reality. Number one, the status of war by military theorists throughout history have thought to identify the philosophy of war and reduce to military science. 2. The importance of the study of wars in all ages. War has been an important topic of analysis. In the latter part of 20th century and in the aftermath of the two world wars and in the shadow of nuclear, biological and chemical wars, more was written on the subject than ever before. Because the endeavors to understand the nature of war, to formulate some theory of its causes, conduct and preventions are becoming ever greater. 3. The art of war is vital importance to the state and to the people. It's a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. Hence, it's a subject of inquiry which can on no account be neglected. This I quote, and I unquote, from Sun Tzu on his book, The Art of War, 2,500 years old. 4. War is as such. No doubt, war is a calamity and social disaster, whether it's afflicted by one nation upon another or conceived as of afflicting humanity as a whole. Leo Tolstoy advocated this concept in his book War and Peace. The study of war and the analysis of the origin, causes and results of wars in the intention of preventing is gaining prominence nowadays. Most of peace research institutes concentrates on two areas: the analysis of international system and the empirical study of the phenomenon of war. 5. The importance of the study of war also. The development of weapons of mass destruction made the task of understanding the nature of war even more urgent. On the one hand, war had become an intractable, unmanageable, uncontrollable, ungovernable social phenomenon, the elimination of which seemed to be an essential precondition for the survival of humanity. 5. I wanted to discuss now the modalities of cessation of war. Wars usually end in one of the following three ways throughout the history. Number 1, stalemate. Two opposing but equal powers might declare stalemate or choose to end a war to avoid utterly pointless loss of life and property, followed by peace negotiations in which the two sides agree on what to do with the conflicted territory. These negotiations often end in treaty or a peace agreement, mostly a very just agreement. 2. Partial surrender. The second possibility is the ultimately weaker side declaring some form of surrender. This will usually also end in some sort of peace negotiation, with the surrendering part holding slightly less negotiating power. 3. The total destruction. The third possibility is simple: utter and complete and total destruction of one side involved in the war. That's the worst. I also wanted to discuss this introductory part, the general principles of causes of war. Of course, I will detail the second part of my presentation, the concept, definition and philosophy of war, that part, the causes of the wars. But for sake of understanding, I wanted to raise two issues here, which are also part of that causes. The causes of wars. Contemporary theories of the causes of the war divide roughly into two major schools. One attributes war to certain innate biological and psychological factors or drives. The other attributes it to a certain social relations and institutions. Both schools include optimistic and pessimistic concerning the preventability of war. So, two of the several causes of the wars. The two issues that I wanted to particularly refer here is the biological theory and psychological theory. Biological theories centering upon man's innate drives are developed by ethologists, the study of human behavior and social organization from biological perspective, who draw analogies from animal behavior, and also by psychologists and psychoanalysts. Ethologists are in the opinion that the study of animal warfare might contribute toward an understanding of war as employed by humans. The behavior of monkeys and apes in captivity and the behavior of young children, for example, show basic similarities. We both share animal and human, rivalry of possession, intrusion of a stranger, or frustration of an activity, and control of a territory are usually associated with patterns of dominance. Biological factor is one of the causes of the war, and they believe, as I mentioned here, that there is some instinct which we share with other animals that's inside our behavior that drives us to do something violent. The other are psychological. One school of theories has postulated that the major causes of war can be found in man's psychological nature. A wide range of ethical and philosophical scholars, such as St. Augustine and the 17th century Dutch philosopher Benedict de Spinoza, believe this concept. Also, whether the psychological premises are optimistic or pessimistic about the nature of man, one cannot ignore the impact human behavior on social and political institutions that give man the opportunities to exercise his good or evil propensities and to impose restraints upon himself. That is one of the two factors, one of the two causes that normally when the scholars of the subject are discussing the causes of the war, they took several causes, and these two are part of that causes. Number seven, the social theory of war. Social theories, the most voluminous and influential theories attributing war to the nature of the state, fell into two broad streams, which can be closely called liberal and social. So we divided this into two parts. One is the liberal thinking of the theory of war. The other is the socialist thinking of the theory of war. I choose to take these views from among many different theories of war because of their totality. They are looking at war in a different ways. What causes the war and how to prevent it. They are looking that way. And that's why I selected among other theory of wars. The liberal first, let me explain. The early or classical liberals of 18th and 19th century distinguished three basic elements in their analysis: individualism, society, and the state, and regarded the state as the outcome of interactions of the former two. Of course, it's the individual and the society that produce the state. They assumed that society is self-regulating and that socio-economic system is able to run smoothly with little interference from the government. Economy, decentralization, and freedom from government control were the classical liberals' main concern, as shown particularly clearly in the writings of many scholars such as John Sartre. They accepted the necessity of maintaining defense, but postulated the existence of a basic harmony of interest among the states, which would minimize the incidence of war. This is a very fascinating point. They believe the solution is here. They said, for example, the economic cooperation based upon an international division of labor and upon free trade would be in the interest of everybody. Commerce would be a great solution, or the rationality to substitute for a war. They believe when there is a democratic system, when the economy is free from interference of government, mostly free from the government, except some guidance to avoid some economic anarchies. They believe when the nations, instead of competing and quarreling over the resources, come together and find what they call international division of labor, then they believe commerce will be the rational substitute for war. That means they have to find a solution, the matter of contention. In explanation, I want to continue their idea. In explanation of wars that did occur, however, liberals emphasized a variety of factors. First, they focused on autocratic governments, which were presumed to wage war against the wishes of peacefully inclined people. Autocratic government usually fails to rule properly their people, because in the first hand they did not come with the consent or the vote of the people. In the second, they are not subject to the parliament or to the people's wishes. So it's most likely that autocratic governments make clash with its people. And also, autocratic government creates unnecessary war because there is no parliament or institutions that's objecting them. Autocratic government has a full power, and they can wage irrational and unnecessary war to other nations every time. So they believe the free election can produce a legitimate government, a government that is subject to the wishes and the rulers of the people. It thus became a major tenet of liberal political philosophy that war could be eliminated by introducing a universal suffrage, because the people would surely vote out of office any belligerently inclined government. The importance of public opinion and of democratically elected government and the rational resolution of conflicts and disputes will prevent war. This is a very sound judgment. It's up to you, but to me it's very, very sound. We have to get an alternative way to settle our contention issue. I wanted to see also the second theory that I selected from the different social theories of war, which is socialist analysis of war. In a way, it resembles it like this, but fundamentally different than liberal philosophy. They said, whereas liberal is concentrated on political structures, regarding them as of a primary importance in determining the propensity of states to engage in war, socialists tended to the socio-economic system of states as the primary factor of causing war. This is fundamental change, but solution is the same. The way is different. That's my explanation, is my own judgment. For example, Karl Marx attributed war not to the behavior of states, but to the class struggle of society. To him, wars occurred not as an often voluntary instrument of state policy, but as a result of a clash of social forces. In it is international relations. The capitalist state engages in wars because it's driven by the dynamism of its system, the constantly growing need for raw material, markets, the supplies of cheap labor. The only way to avoid war is to remove its basic cause by replacing capitalism with socialism, thus abolishing both the class struggle and the states. They mean if all the world states become socialists, there is no struggle for raw material market and the sort of that. And they also believe within a given government, when there is no class struggle and the state becomes socialist state, there is no people fighting each other, so there is no reason to fight. That's what they. Let me continue. In its international relations, the capitalist states, I wanted to now take also the types of war. The types of war I wanted to present here in general purpose to give a feeling the different types of war. Of course, we will take in the second part of our presentation the types of war, and also how the scholars of the subject divided when they are making the types of war, because they group the types of war. Some of the scholars, they group the types of the war because of the nature of their causes. Some of scholars categorize wars because of the instrument applied, or the magnitude, or how it's fought, or the philosophy behind. But now I wanted to make simply general without categorize or divide the types of the war. The types of war include, for example, asymmetric warfare. It's a conflict between belligerents of drastically different levels of military capability and or size. Some of them consider this type of war not war at all, but massacre. Biological warfare or germ warfare is the use of weaponized biological toxins or infectious agents such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi. Chemical warfare involves the use of weaponized chemicals in combat. Poison gas as a chemical weapon was principally used during World War I and resulted in over 1 million estimated casualties, including 100,000 civilians. Civil war is a war between forces belonging to the same nation or political entity. Conventional warfare is declared war between states in which nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons are not used or permitted. Cyber warfare involves the actions of nation-state or international organization to attack and attempt to damage another nation's information system. In my understanding, cyber warfare, and there is also information warfare which is coming, which we did not reach yet. Cyber warfare I consider part of information warfare because it is very exclusive to attacking the system of the information, that like virus, malware, something, identity theft, confusion. But information warfare is more larger in context and in application. Information warfare is an application of destructive forces on a large scale against the information assets and systems, against the computers and networks that support the four critical infrastructures: the power grid, communications, financial, and transportation. Nuclear warfare is a warfare in which nuclear weapons are the primary or the major method of achieving capitulation. Total war is a warfare by any means possible, disregarding the laws of war, placing no limits on legitimate military targets, using weapons and tactics resulting in significant civilian casualties, or demanding war effort requiring significant sacrifice by the friendly civilians. Unconventional warfare. The opposite of conventional warfare is an attempt to achieve military victory through acquiescence, capitulation, or clandestine support from one side of an existing conflict. War of aggression is a war of conquest or gain rather than self-defense. This can be the basis of war crimes under customary international law. War of liberation. Wars of national liberation is revolutions, are conflicts fought by nations to gain independence. The term is used in conjunction with wars against foreign powers, or at least those perceived as foreign, to establish separate sovereign states for the rebellion nationality. I want to make the conclusion of this. I want to make this conclusion is the subject of war is important, and some scholars even they do not call the subject of war, but they call correctly the subject of war on peace, because if any nation or any people fail to maintain peace, they are in war, and if any people fail to get solution contentious issues, they have no peace. So some people or scholars call this subject the subject of war and peace, but unfortunately commonly it's known to the subject of war. Many scholars have written on the subject, from the Cicero, the Roman statesman and military leader who led the Roman forces 2,000 years ago, crossed the Mediterranean Sea and defeated the Carthage, the Tunisian, who were the main opposing force of Roman at the time. He was a statesman. He was also a military leader. He wrote many fascinating and vividly accounts on definition, concept, and philosophy of war. Also, my favorite, Sun Tzu, 2,500 years ago, he wrote his book, Art of War, which until today every academic is studied. Also, there are many other scholars that developed either the definition, the philosophy, the concept of war. So there are many scholars, whether they are historians or military analysts, politicians, diplomats, philosophers, those scholars who are interested through the travail of ages, the subject of war and judging the war from different perspectives. We collected in a very summary and very short, selected essays and selected points. So in my conclusion is, number one, what's coming up is the second part of our presentation, That part is the definition, concept, and philosophy of war. It will consist, as I tell before, 9 topics: the socio-political definition of war, the quantitative criteria in the definition of war, the judicial conception of war, the multifactoriality of the war causation, the typologies of war, the incident and frequency of war, the violence index through ages of war, the periodicity of war, the population and war, and the conclusion of the definition, concept, and philosophy of war. Also, the third presentation will cover military strategy and tactics. This is actually in the more concern in the field. The definition and principles, strategic and tactical principles of warfare, strategic and tactical maneuvers, emergence of modern warfare, the 19th century theory and technological change, the World War trench tactics to nuclear strategy tactics, military strategies, levels of war, theory of war and peace in a nutshell. So this subject is very important. War, unfortunately, is a reality in our life. We have to study very much to understand war, to be able to prevent war. Thank you very much.